Welcome to the Wordy Pair Podcast, your go-to hub for all things writing, world building, and the occasional dive into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We're breaking down the barriers between you and your next great story. Whether you're a seasoned scribe or just scribbling your first sentences, we've got something for you. We'll be discussing everything from crafting compelling characters to dissecting the good, the bad, and the downright bizarre in the world of fiction. Okay, this script says you guys are eccentric. Isn't that just a 3-syllable word for weird? No offense. So, whether you're in need of inspiration, a good laugh, or just a couple of weirdos to keep you company on your writing journey, you're in the right place. Thanks for tuning in to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
Hello and welcome everybody. This is the Wordy Pair Podcast. And as usual, I am Rudy.
And as unusual, I am Justin.
And today we are going to be talking about a book called Magician Apprentice by a guy named Raymond E. Feist. It's a fantasy novel. I think it was his first... It was either his first or like one of his really early novels.
I know that was the first Rift War saga book, wasn't it?
Yes, it is the first Rift War saga book. It kind of is a companion with Magician Master, which I kind of get this feeling that they were once like one volume or something. I don't know. I have a paperback copy, and
this was a long time ago. This might have been during the time when they were like, we're not going to publish a book that big. Let's split it up.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it looks like the original copyright is 1982.
Yeah.
And then there were future editions from 1986 and onward. My edition is 92, copyright 92, but with cover art, copyright 93. So it must have been published after that, or printed after that. But
just for
as
reference,
as far as I know, this is one of his first novels, and it's a pretty solid fantasy novel that creates a world that I've enjoyed with some slight reservations here and there. But
I've got some
general,
qualifications on that too.
Yeah. Well,
but before we get rolling, I just wanted to ask you do you know if your copy is the author's cut, if you will?
Yeah, I have the author's preferred edition.
Okay, yeah, because it's according to the author himself, there's not that big a difference. If you've already read the original, you're not going to get anything new out of the author's edition, but it was just a few things that they didn't put in the original book that he thought would have made it better, but it doesn't matter that much. But that's where we are. I also read the author's edition, so if we're talking about something that nobody's heard of before, that might be why.
Well, so I haven't read the foreword to the revised edition in a while, but to those readers who've already discovered Magician, who wonder if it's an interest to purchase this edition, nothing profound has been changed. No characters previously dead are now alive. No battles lost are now won. I ask you to feel no compulsion to read this new volume, for your memory of the original work is as valid, perhaps more so than mine. To celebrate the 10th edition of the publication of the original Magician, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I return to my first work I undertook. Yeah, so it was his first novel. Restore some of the excised bits, some of the minor detail that he felt added to the heft of the narrative, as well as the weight of the book. Other material more directly related to the books that follow. Setting some of the background for the mythic underpinning of the Rift War. Slightly lengthy discussion of lore between Tully and Colgan in Chapter 3. Some of the things revealed to Pug on the Tower of Testing. My editor wasn't sold on the idea of a sequel then, so some of this was cut. Returning it may be self-indulgent, but as this wasn't the material I felt belonged in the original book, it has been restored. So, yeah, this is the revised edition where basically Raymond Feist had written several other books and said, hey, there's some things I want in this book that got edited out the first time, so let's put them in. No major changes, but yeah. I have not read the original version, so I can't tell you that there's what the differences are exactly, other than what's in his foreword.
It sounds like essentially you can read either one, and it's actually a pretty good book, so go ahead and read it. Yeah. All right, roll credits. We're good.
Done.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast.
I'm gonna put in like 3 seconds of the outro.
I think if I've got one good way to say what I thought of the book is that I have had a copy of Betrayal at Krondor sitting on my bookshelf for like 10 years now that I've never touched, and now I want to read it. So that's
good.
That's a good way to...
That's a positive.
Yeah, that's a good way to give my opinion of that.
So
what
I
I've
think
read
we mentioned
so far.
this. I think we've mentioned this in an earlier episode, but like the way that I got introduced to Raymond Feist's stuff was through the game Betrayal at Krondor. And if you read, there's a little like discussion of how stuff worked for Betrayal at Krondor, because he didn't write the novel. What happened was the game company, Dynamics, working with Sierra, licensed, or maybe it was somebody else at the time, but the copy of the game that I got was made by Dynamics and licensed through Sierra or something like that. Those are the two names I remember being attached to it. And he said, "Yeah, they licensed my world basically." I said, you can't afford to have me write the story for your game. And they're like, "No, we don't want to do that. You're right, we can't afford that. What we want is we want to license your setting, and we're going to write our own story." And then he basically like kept the rights to write a novel about that setting and those events later on, or something like that. Betrayal at Krondor, the game is exceedingly difficult and pretty slow paced. It's a neat CRPG, kind of a more obscure classic than a lot of the things that you might think of when you think of computer role playing games in the early 90s, which is when I think it came out. But and so like I've never finished the game, but the quality of the storytelling in the game at certain points made me interested in the world. And when I found that there was a book called Betrayal at Krondor by Raymond Feist, I was like, "Oh, is this the book of the game?" And it kind of sort of is, but it was written afterwards. So I picked that up, and I picked up its 2 sequels. Enjoyed those, and then I kind of went on a little bit of a Raymond Feist like
you got a bit
purchasing
feisty,
spree.
is what you're saying.
Yeah, I got feisty. That's right. And I bought a bunch of his books, including Magician Apprentice, Magician Master. A lot of his early stuff. I missed out on Silverthorn. I haven't picked that one up yet, but most of the other stuff I've seen. Some of his newer stuff I've gone through as well. So, I wouldn't say that I'm a giant Raymond Feist fan, but he's definitely one of my main fantasy authors that I read. So maybe that does make me a fan, I guess.
He's a new indulgence for me because this is the first book that I've read by him, and I liked it. So
yeah,
I will definitely be reading some more.
Yeah, Magician Apprentice is interesting because compared to Magician Master, this is like the low magic half of the story.
Thank God. That's a big complaint I've got coming up.
Yeah. Tell me more.
Well, the book is called Magician Apprentice.
Right.
And the book starts out, I loved how it started out with Pug being this boy that is kind of hoping to acquire an apprenticeship at some point, and things aren't looking good right away, but it's quickly resolved where this wizard in the kingdom decides that he's going to take him on as an apprentice, and as Pug puts it, he practically did it out of pity. Yep. But the wizard's name was
Colgan.
Colgan. I almost said Cardigan.
Cardigan.
Yeah, so Colgan, during this selection process, there's all these kids being selected for apprenticeships, and Pug is left standing by himself, and that can do a lot to a person. So this wizard who had met him previously in the early part of the story decides to take him on as apprentice, and he tells him later on that it wasn't just out of pity, it was also he needed an apprentice of his own, so it kind of worked in both of their favors that nobody else selected him.
Well, I mean, when they met earlier, Pug kind of demonstrated his intelligence to Colgan a bit, and it's well done because Pug's good friend is Tomas, Thomas. I don't know. There's no pronunciation.
I listened to the audiobook. They called him Thomas. So
okay, Thomas is fine then. Pug's friend Thomas wants to. They both want to be soldiers together, basically, and see the world. And basically, Thomas gets picked as an up and coming soldier, a recruit for the army there, but Pug does not, and so Pug gets basically picked up by the other half of the belligerent side of dealing with things, and gets to become a magician, or kind of sort of gets to become a magician. He's not good at it, which is part of the interesting development of the book.
That's where the book kind of slows down for me, though, because in a book called Magician Apprentice, you go into it with this idea that, okay, this book is going to be about him being apprentice to this wizard, which barely happens in the book. The book very quickly turns into this story about creatures from another world invading, and it turns into a war. So you don't actually get to see much of Pug learning anything from Calgon. He's more sort of, there's a handful of mentions of how he was being taught and how he was having trouble, and there's some reason, possibly due to whatever happens in the other book, that he can't quite pull off a lot of the spells he's trying to use, but then he ends up just accidentally being able to use magic early on in the story to save a not a princess. What is she? Yeah,
she's a princess, but she's the daughter.
She's the
of
Duke's
a Duke.
daughter, not the King's. So he ends up at the very beginning of the story. It's almost like fairy tale over, happy end. This kid rescues a princess, and he's given a portion of the kingdom, but he doesn't actually own this land or this title or anything until he turns a certain age. So none of that has happened yet, and it's just a story unfolding of him and a bunch of the people that he knew when he was younger, ending up in this war a few years later. And the information kind of spreads out across all the different characters instead of focusing much on Pug. And in fact, it really felt like the majority of the book was more focused on Aretha and Thomas than it was Pug for the second half of the book. So
basically what Raymond Feist is doing here is he's creating 3 story threads. He's creating the magician story thread, which is Pug, and Colgan, and Macros. He's creating the political thread, which is Arutha and Boric and Liam, and their dealings with the various members of royalty in the kingdom. And he's setting up the Thomas arc, which is altogether a very different thing. Thomas basically, by way of some very lucky occurrences, he actually ends up becoming kind of the famed warrior that he hoped to become. It's a fun development, but those 3 threads are going to be the main threads of the Rift War, and the political threads are really important because, to be honest, Midkemia, the world that they're on, is a fairly low magic world, at least in these early books. And so it's a lot about the internal machinations of the kingdom, and honor of nobles or dishonor of nobles and things like that. There's a lot of political twists and turns, and a lot of really good war narratives in the story, and those are I really enjoy those. I really enjoy the world that Feist creates in Midkemia here. With there's a lot of fun, colorful characters that appear that become very relevant to the just the plain old kingdom stuff, and of course Pug remains relevant for a long, going forward. But the low magic quality of Midkemia is something that you should probably be aware of if you're going to be looking up this book. This is not a book where you have people throwing fireballs around a lot. It does happen in the later books a lot more. Raymond Feist got a little bit more bombastic with his magic later on, but down here in these early books, the stakes are kind of low. I mean, the stakes are high for the characters in the book, and that's handled appropriately. But realistically, the stakes are pretty small in the sense of one tiny kingdom, whether that kingdom survives or not when it's under attack by this group from another world that happened to just stumble upon them. And Prince Arutha becomes a really, really great character later on. Just really stunningly interesting character, and he kind of also becomes like a base for other characters to attach to, if that makes sense. Where there's a lot of other really cool and interesting characters that show up later that are attached to Arutha and his political situation, basically. Later on, we get people like Jimmy the Hand, we get Jazara, and once you kind of once you get past, there's the Rift War saga, and then there's the Rift War, what's it called? There's a sequel series that's 4 books. That's also pretty low magic, but after that, magic gets a lot bigger, the political machinations become less important because stakes get higher, and the people involved become more powerful and less willing to be a part of some little kingdom on Midkemia.
It's a little interesting how the world building goes. I really liked that aspect of it. There's definitely something that even if it remained low magic, like I don't really care much whether it's got a ton of magic spells flying around or not. What was disappointing was just that one aspect of it where it's like I wanted to see the journey of this character actually being a magician apprentice. Now it seems like there's still a lot of that to go because he still hasn't mastered very much by the end of that first book.
Right.
There's a lot of characters in the book that I thought were great. Aretha's one of them. He did do a little bit more towards the end of the book. That's kind of where I started to really he kind of grew on me.
Yeah, he grows on you.
There was a surprise character out of nowhere that I was just like, oh, that's a character I'm going to love. And it was that Charlie character, one of the invaders that ends up joining
Charles is
them.
Great. Yeah, he becomes a recurring character in the later books, too.
Yeah, he only really had the one moment where he was like, yeah, I just jumped in and started fighting them for you. It's all cool. I'm a good warrior.
Well, so in the second book, we're going to learn a lot more about the Tsurani world.
Yeah.
And
it seems like, just based off of what I read at the very end, it's like, oh, this is kind of like a Japanese honor sort of society.
Yeah, it's fantasy Japan.
Yeah.
Which is fine. There's more to it than that. Calling it just fantasy Japan is a little bit too is way oversimplifying things. But like the concept of the Tsurani code of honor, it becomes more important later on. It gets fleshed out better as well later on. And yeah, so if you liked Apprentice, you're gonna really love Magician Master because it has more of the magician training stuff, as well as really bringing all of that, all of the political machinations and all of the stuff that's kind of fuzzy in Apprentice up all the way together, and it works really well. I enjoy both of these books quite a lot.
It feels like after reading the first one that, I mean, I have to read the second one because it feels like they're just one book. Because the first one does a lot.
I'm looking at the forward of the revised edition, and he just calls it magician a bunch of times. And so I think that it was actually...
Yeah, I think the revised edition was put out as one book just called Magician.
Possibly, yeah.
But the...
It's so weird.
Even in that version, the second part is titled Book 2.
Yes. Well, it's called Magician Master.
Yeah. And it just, that whole first book, though, that's a lot of world building stuffed into the beginning. So it seems like the second book is very much meant to go right together with it. Like, as soon as you're done reading one, move right on to the next one.
Yeah.
I would bet that he wrote both of them practically at the same time. I doubt there was much in between. Not that I've read Master, but just because after reading it, it's just like, yeah, this is setup. This is almost all setup. A lot of really good setup, but you don't really know. You know a lot about the world, but you don't know a lot about what's going.
There's some really good parts in this book. Like their meeting with the Mad King is super interesting to me.
Yes.
And the way that all goes, because you have this really great situation where the king is going nuts, and they're like, they know that the king is going nuts, but at the same time they're bound by their vassalage, and it's not like they're willing to just throw that all away. And the notion of the world is large enough that there's enough of these random nobles that you couldn't just like overthrow the king and say, okay, I'm the new king, because I don't know. This is the impression that I got from what I've read and heard about like the Game of Thrones show. But it's like there's really only like a couple of different people that might be acceptable on a throne, and there's not really a whole lot of attention paid to what the rest of the nobles would think about that king and whether they'd be willing to be vassals in that. But in this, it's like, well, we don't want to throw the kingdom into civil war because that's like the worst thing ever. And so there's a lot of really interesting and really cool like gray area stuff that goes on. Not like gray area stuff, but like doing things grudgingly or like being bound to honor to do things the right way. And for some reason, I find that really fascinating, and it creates some really good characters. Like he's a bit character in the book, but the noble Caldric is he's basically like advisor to the king, and the scenes with him are just like, to me, they're just mind blowing. They're like amazingly well written and amazingly well put together. That there's this guy who wants what's best for the kingdom, and yet culturally they're trained to believe that the king is the kingdom, right? And they've just got this really awful dilemma that they're trying to deal with, and they don't know how to do it. And they're just trying their best not to let things fall into total disarray, because at this point, if the kingdom got thrown into civil war, they would lose the war with the Tsurani as well. And so like it's a really cool part of the book that I really enjoy going over again and again. Another part that I really like is there's a chapter where they cover a siege of one of the cities, and there's this moment where the Tsurani have been throwing themselves against the castle walls all day, and there's thousands and thousands of dead soldiers out there. From both sides too, because there were some actions outside the walls as well, and like they all the kingdom soldiers go out and they start piling the corpses onto a funeral pyre, and the Tsurani soldiers come out and they help them build the funeral pyre, and they like salute each other. It's like one of those really cool moments that's one of my most remembered moments in the book, is that little moment there of opposing soldiers kind of, it's like those stories of Christmas in the trenches in World War I. It reminds me of that. And
well, just about everything in that part of the story, it played out really well like that. Like what was it Martin that fired the arrow at the Tsurani soldier?
Yes.
Yeah, so that whole scene was great too, because they kind of,
oh yeah,
they had a character who kind of interpreted what was going on for the reader. He was like, "Oh, I've seen things like this before." So there was one Tsurani that like came up to the walls of the castle and just started banging on the walls, and
right.
Of course they're not going to open up for him. So he takes a swing at it with his axe and walks away. And the character that's on the that's inside, that's watching this happen and talking to the other people present, he says, "Yeah, this is the idea is that he's supposed to act brave by coming out alone, and then all of his people cheer for him, and if we kill him, then that shows we have no honor." So instead, they fire an arrow between his legs, and
no, it's a fouling shot. They hit him in the gut with a fouling shot.
No. The first thing they did was fire an arrow between his legs, which gave him another chance. He picks up the arrow, snaps it, and holds it in the air, and gets all of his people to cheer for him. And at this point, the interpreter is explaining that, well, this is kind of where they want us to send someone out to challenge this guy as like an act of...
you mean that they shoot an arrow at his feet?
Yeah. Well, was it at his feet, or I thought it was between his legs that they shot it?
Well, they shoot an arrow at his feet, not but between his. Shooting him with an arrow between his legs has another connotation that maybe you might be missing.
No, I'm not missing it, but I think that's what they did, because it was Martin Longbow, right?
They didn't hit him with an arrow in the groin.
No, they shot him between, it goes in the ground. Yes, okay, I see what you mean. They fire into the ground between his legs to kind of give him pause.
Yeah.
and then after that, when they're like, okay, well, we're not going to send anyone out there, but we're not going to kill him either, so let's give them something to think about. And that's when they fired the fouling shot into his chest and caused him to fall to his knees by taking a blunt-headed arrow.
Yeah.
To the solar plexus, essentially. It was
Yeah, that's another really good moment too, because the McKeemian people have their own, sense of honor, and it's not like they just don't have. It's fighting an enemy that you can't talk with, and so they don't know anything about the Serrani culture or anything like that. So they're just like, I don't know, is it this? I don't know. Make him throw up. That'll get rid of some of that dignity that he claims at the beginning.
Yeah. But that was probably like the high action of that book was the attack on Critty.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot in this story that in a lot of connotations I would be making fun of. The sheer amount of luck that some of these characters have that is just kind of brushed aside in the book is normally something that I would say, well, this doesn't make for a good story. But in this case, it was kind of like, no, there's probably a lot of luck that goes on in situations like this, and because the author isn't really drawing much attention to it, it kind of works. Such as, you knew at some point Pug was going to have to use his magic, so it wasn't surprising that by sheer luck he was able to pull off a spell that saved a princess. And, this might have led to a lot of his fortune, going forward, and some of his non-fortune as well, but in that moment, he was incredibly lucky. By the same note, you had Thomas, who was very lucky in the fight with the, was it a ghoul? I'm trying to remember.
It's
a wraith. Yeah. It was he escapes a wraith, and just by sheer luck, he wanders into a mountain hole belonging to a dragon, and the dragon's got his hoard of treasure there, and this results in him becoming friends with a dragon who is old and about to die, and receiving a suit of magical armor, which helps him fight off the enemy later on.
Yeah.
So that was also very lucky. That actually led to a few of the really cool scenes in the book, like where he's running with the elves, and they're surprised that he's able to keep up with them, and that he's not afraid.
They're surprised by a lot of what he is. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Thomas thread is interesting in this book, and it gets brought to a really good conclusion in the second book. So
he's having these visions, and one of the visions he has was of this warrior king or something, who is kind of dispassionate. Like he kills an elf princess just because he didn't like the way that she noticed his not confusion,
uneasiness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he decided that she had to die because she noticed. And he does kill her. And I was wondering, because I didn't read the second book yet, so I was wondering, when he shows up in that armor, there's that elf queen that sees him in the armor, and there's just a brief description of how she was surprised to see how he looked. And I'm wondering if she recognized the armor. So I'm looking forward to finding out if there was anything important to that.
Yeah.
There was also, that was Thomas's luck. There was also the luck of, like, how do I put it? There was a lot of luck in terms of, this guy has ferrets underneath the castle, and because he knows where they come from, and he found one that crawled its way back home and had apparently been stepped on but wasn't killed. He was like, there's something down in the cellars, something below the caverns of the castle. And so that led them to discover that the Serrani were planning on digging their way into the castle.
Right.
And so they were able to put a stop to that. That was another instance of the high luck that everyone has. There was also the luck of someone having been inside the head of one of these creatures so that he could sort of interpret what some of them were saying.
Yeah.
I guess even Pug being taken prisoner is kind of lucky, because they were basically killing everyone else.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of kind of a plot armory element, in the sense that, like, for instance, when they're on their way past through Stone Mountain, right? They have like a group of 50 people, including, I think, Martin Longbow and Arutha and Pug and Colgan and 50 soldiers or something like that. And, a bunch of stuff happens, and the majority of the soldiers get killed, but none of the main characters get killed.
Yeah.
There's definitely some of that going on. I mean, in general, it's fairly well handled. I would say the people who are main characters are not main characters just because they are, the main, just because the author says they're the main characters. In a sense, they're very skilled at what they do, and they're in positions where people will, die to protect them for the purpose of their mission, basically. And so, there's some of that going on, but it's pretty well handled in general.
Well, I mean, the plot armor complaint is something that we might be able to talk about sometime, but there is an element to understanding what drives a story forward.
Sure.
And a lot of it is looked at as plot armor, and it is, but that's one of those things where it's not a bad thing necessarily, because if you have a group of characters who are the driving point of your story, and you need them alive to tell the story, you can't just be killing them willy-nilly. The point of them having people that go along with them and having some of those people die is just to show how dire a situation is, or how important a certain outcome might be. So that's something that's going to happen in stories. There's nothing you can really do to prevent that from happening. You can't just not ever have anyone die in a high fantasy story that involves a war.
Right. Well, but it also makes it very difficult to tell a cohesive story if all of your main characters are getting killed at the rate of replacement of the average soldier in such a situation, right?
Yeah.
Like if you talk about like World War II or something, some units had like 200% replacement rates, where over a month, right? Where they would be in 3 battles, and in each of the 3 battles they would lose 2/3 of their men and have them replaced with others. Right, and so like if I mean, there's a point in the second book where Feist kind of does a good job of showing how this dynamic works, in the sense that there's this one point where the king, in the second book, there's this point where the king goes to battle and gets knocked off his horse, and the way that he describes it, he's like, 100 of our men willingly died to protect the king from the swarm of Tsurani that were going after him after he was knocked off of his horse. And so it's like, the implication is that, Arutha's not dying for 2 reasons. Number 1, because he's really good with the blade. And number 2, because the other soldiers are sworn to protect him, since he's, the son of their liege lord,
Yeah.
And it's very hard to get that across, to make that feel right. I think Feist does a pretty good job of it usually.
Well, I don't know if any particular plot armor moment in a story, if there's nothing that you can do to make it so perfectly rounded that someone can't point at it and be like, "Oh, that's plot armor." But I mean, you have to have that to tell a story. It's just a
series of events. I mean, you can classify something as plot armor because character X died when character Y did not. Right? That's it's a question of, is it egregious? And I think that it's not egregious in these books in general. There are a couple of points where some things where there's definitely some luck going on, but in general, we've got the main characters are skilled with their weapons, and so they're less likely to be killed in battle in general. And then they're usually in positions of authority that that put them not quite on the front lines, if that makes sense. Like they're not the foot soldiers. They're someone gets through the front line, then they have to go to work, and then there's some danger. I mean, later on in some of the later stories, Feist does go through and kill off some pretty important characters pretty ignominiously and pretty suddenly, and this being his first fantasy novel, I kind of forgive a little bit of it, because he's really trying to build a world and create a few of these big plot threads that would get cut off pretty badly if the heads of these plot threads, got killed ignominiously because a random arrow hit them. And in fact, random arrows do hit them; they just graze them, kind of thing. That happens.
And it's important to look at it from the other side too. I mean, I basically hate watched Game of Thrones. It was not my cup of tea, but all I could think was you would have like 7 characters that have this really well-developed plot line that they're following. Like it's like, oh, I can't wait to see where this goes. And then all 7 of them die, and you're just like, what's my investment here?
Yeah.
I remember going through that show and every single...
It's a balancing act because, well, it's like you know, a lot of the main characters in like Saving Private Ryan die, right? Because they're just literally soldiers in a war, right?
Yeah.
They're not General Eisenhower.
That's the type
right?
of story,
you know,
too. You're expecting it in this situation.
Right. You know, there's no... I mean, this might be fun to make, but I don't think anyone's made it. But as far as I know, there's no World War II story called Eisenhower Dies at the End, right?
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, since this is a first book, and since it's kind of doing a lot of world building, it's creating those major plot threads that are going to flow through later books. And yeah, I mean, I as a creator, I agree that you don't want to be throwing away people's investment with characters willy-nilly. Just to give an example, like we had this discussion about characters in shonen manga, right?
Yeah.
Bad guys becoming good guys. You don't create a really cool bad guy and then kill him off in shonen manga. That's a way to lose a lot of your audience, right? And in shonen manga, your weekly audience is everything. It determines whether you get to write your next week's version, your next week's edition, or you know, maybe a few weeks out, but you know how it is.
See Bakuman.
Right, see Bakuman. And yeah, I mean, it if you read enough of these books, you become pretty invested in Arutha and in Pug and in Thomas and in other characters that show up too. And a mix of them get, you know, injured and or killed. And there are, of course, occasional situations where, you know, a character will get into a situation where you don't know if he's going to live or die at the end, and you never really are sure until you've read it, and then you know. But like, yeah, I mean, I guess my point is that I think any book where the main characters survive could be said to have a plot armor problem, but you can do it poorly and you can do it well, and I think Feist usually does it well.
Yeah, you know, actually, that reminds me, there was another big point of luck in the story.
Okay.
Not so much plot armor style luck, but when they were visiting the Mad King.
Yes.
And it was page after page of them just being distraught over how are we going to handle the situation. We need to start working on a way to fight back against the Serani. And we don't have any control over forces that would let us do that. The king is going to give it to this other person. And things just kind of neatly wrapped up with the king being angry when he receives news about these Serani attacks and what happened in several different places.
It was a really cool up and down situation, actually, because they're like, who can we suggest that the king give the armies to that, you know, he won't balk at, right? It can't be Boric, because Boric is in the line for the throne. It can't be Erland, because Erland is too sick to lead the army. And they're like, what about this guy? You know, this guy is just basically a lifelong soldier, but he's skilled, and his first thing, and the first thing he'll do if he gets control of the armies is he'll say, I need Boric as my main advisor. So like, why don't we do this? And you're like, oh, that's really cool. They're gonna, you know, that's a really cool little machination. And then right as they're about to try that machination, it all goes completely, you know, tits up. And and basically the guy that they were going to suggest loses a battle to the Tsurani, and the king is pissed. It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, and then the king just hands it over to Boric.
To Boric, anyway. So that worked out really well, right? Like, but like it could have worked the way that it went. You're like, ooh, this is going to work out well, and then this is not going to work out well, and then you're like, ooh, it worked out well.
It worked out better than imagined.
Yeah,
that might have been the luckiest part of the whole story. It's because they're looking at it like, we are screwed, and then the king's just like, here you go, everything you want.
Well, kind of, sort of. Like, what they're a little bit unclear about there is how long it's going to take Guidu Bastira to get to Rhiannon. And Guidu Bastira is another really super interesting character in the later books, and he's really cool. Kind of he's the shonen manga villain kind of character, where, you know, not to spoil anything, but you know, he definitely becomes part of the story later on, and it's very satisfying to read. There's definitely luck here and there. You know, Thomas getting away from the Wraith in the first place is huge luck.
And then to find magical armor on top of that.
Yeah.
There were some moments in the story where I had a few good chuckles. I think one of my favorites was close to the end when I think it was it Roland? I think it was Roland that is telling Carline that this war is probably going to go on for a while.
Yeah.
And when I heard that line, because I was listening to the audiobook, not reading it, but listening to it.
Right.
When I heard that line, I pictured Roland turning to face like the fourth wall and winking at the reader, because I knew it was called the Rift War Saga, and he was absolutely right.
Yeah, Roland and Carline are both good characters. The Carline actually has kind of a nice tie off to her end of the story by the end of Magician Master. She's a cool character. She's a really good motivator to Pug and Roland early in the book. There's that really great scene where Pug, Roland, and Thomas all basically make the three kingdoms vow of friendship kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is always satisfying to get these characters who are kind of rivals, and then they decide, no, you know what? We're bigger than all of this stuff that's trying to pit us against each other, and we're gonna pledge friendship to each other, and it's a really cool part of it's a really fun part of the story as well.
Well, that right there is one of the reasons that I've just been stuck, going back and reading older books, because it's a breath of fresh air compared to everything that you see on TV and all. I mean, even all the modern writing, everybody is just never trustful of anyone else. There's no honor among anyone in any of these stories. They'll be written as though they're honorable characters, but then you just watch them turn on someone at the drop of a hat. And then you read this and it's like, okay, Roland and Pug do not like each other, and they get into this big fight, and they're fighting over a woman essentially, and then they get done with it, and after a bit of a chat, Roland is like, basically I know that she actually likes you, and that's what I'm competing with here, and I don't think I'm going to be able to change her mind, and I'm not going to stop trying, but I think we can still be friends. Because they kind of have this heart-to-heart where they're like, she kind of turns us against one another once in a while.
It's real. That part of the story is brilliantly written, because there's a whole bunch of this but this but this but this, and it really, you kind of have to look twice at things as this goes on, and this is really well told in the span of like just a few pages. And it's really effectively done. One part of the story that I really enjoy, especially the fact that it ends up with several things happening that advance the plot and create this bond between these three characters that shows up later on in later stories as well, in ways that are both bittersweet and satisfying. It's really cool.
Yeah, I also really liked the part during that whole thing where they were sitting down and drinking wine together, and it was Pug, Thomas, and Roland, and they're talking about that time that Thomas beat Roland in a fight, and they're all a bit tipsy at this point, and Roland gets up and he goes, there was one really good reason that I have one really good excuse for not being able to win that fight, Thomas, and they're thinking he's boasting, or he's got something, and he's going to say some clever thing, and Thomas is like, oh yeah, what's that? Because they all know that Thomas would win a fight if it was Thomas and Roland. And Roland raises his glass and says, "You were winning." And that's his excuse for why he lost.
He even writes that he does it like in a conspiratorial tone, like, you were winning. Mostly to Pug, yeah.
So until that point, Roland is just presented as like, because there's always that character in a lot of writing where it's just like, you're supposed to hate this character, he's just the jerk the whole time. And up until that point, Roland is that character. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh no, Roland's actually a good character. I actually
Roland's
like him
pretty freaking awesome, actually, yeah.
And he gets so much better as the story goes on, and all the way up until the point where he's dragging the princess back to a room to put her somewhere safe so that she isn't going to get herself
Yeah.
killed in a war, and she's angry at him. She even tells a guard to arrest him, and he just sticks a finger right in the guard's face and says, "You put her in that room. You make sure she's safe. If something happens to her, I'm going out to all the nobles, and I'm going to tell them whose fault it is, and it's going to be your fault." And the payoff for that was so great, because the princess is in the room with the guard, and she's really angry, and then she's like, "Wow, he was really determined." And she says it in like, she's actually like impressed with Roland after all of that. She was so angry, and then out of nowhere, just like, actually, that's kind of awesome.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, you're gonna like Magician Master when you get around to it. If you get to read Darkness at Sethanon, you'll like that one once you've read Magician Master. And the Krondor series is a lot of fun. They're a little bit more Dungeons and Dragons-y, but they're still really solid reads. And they start to kind of go in that high magic direction where everybody's throwing fireballs kind of thing. It's better than that, but it is going in that direction. And some of the later books are so high stakes that like it kind of becomes a little bit exhausting. But yeah, I've enjoyed most of the Raymond Feist that I've read, and Magician Apprentice is definitely a solid book with a lot of fun scenes. I really like them meeting Macros for the first time. That's really cool.
Yeah, just an aside there, the reader for the audiobook kept reading it as Macross, and so I just kept picturing this towering robot every time it was brought up.
I don't know if the author if the reader got details from the author on how these things are pronounced, but from the way that you're pronouncing things, I pronounce almost everything different from how that reader did. So
I love that kind of thing, though. That's like we've talked about this before. Like I have lots of characters with names that are purposely meant to be able to be pronounced several ways.
One of your recent short stories, you named your character like a different word. It was the Kids in Space story that you wrote a couple of months ago.
Kids in Space.
The kid soldiers in space. Yeah, that's kind of how the story felt like to me. And like there was a character who was named like he was named like an adjective, and I was like, I couldn't read. I kept thinking that his name was just the adjective, and I'm like, what? This sentence doesn't make grammatical sense.
The team attachment story.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Shoot. What character
story
was that? I actually wrote that several years ago. I just didn't have it up on that blog until recently.
Right.
So I don't remember what those names were.
Yeah, that's fine. It's just one of those characters' names is just a word, and so it's so jarring.
Fantastic
indeed.
So I'm looking it up now. We got okay, it wasn't the captain. Captain Two Base Burbank.
No.
I really don't remember what the name was. Toots? Is it Toots?
No. Hold on, I'll find it.
Fitzel, definitely not Fitzel.
Outpost Battalion Attachments.
We're looking stuff up on the internet while doing this again.
Well, no, it was...
And then there's just a character named Simon.
Right. It was Attachments. The character's name was Attachments.
Oh, yeah.
and there's a point where you're like, attachments, shouted Two Base, and it's like, what attachments? Oh, the character.
well, to be fair, that's not her full name.
I know, but like, still, it is what they call her in the story, and like I was like, what's going on in this story? I can't tell. The character, one of the main characters' names is just a word that like fits in wherever you would like normally like use a character's name or like use just a regular word. It's like,
I'm the opposite of a Raymond Feist. Raymond Feist will just be like, I'm calling this character Pug.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, no, we can do better than that. I'm going to call this character Attachments, like a vacuum cleaner.
Oh god, the vacuum cleaner thing makes me think of like, you should have made her middle name Kirby.
I forget what it was that I was watching that made me want to write this story to begin with.
Yeah.
But there was something about the character's name in some cartoon I was watching that gave me the idea for her name. So I don't know.
That's fair enough.
The vacuum cleaner thing did not really pop into my head when I wrote it.
Yeah.
What was her name? Like Belfon LaFleur Attachments or something?
Yeah. Something suitably ridiculous.
Yes. Even more so because she was just a robot, so...
Yeah. What? Wait, was she?
Yeah, she was the robot that ran the shit. Oh God, I really should have done more with this. This was just a one-off, but now that I'm thinking about it, the plot is so ridiculous. Or the backdrop of it is so ridiculous. It's like, oh yeah, we've got these 4 children who are like our super elite team of like half cyborg characters, and the leader, the one boy, is just like, yeah, so basically we were on a battlefield and we were attacked and they recovered our bodies and then they just sort of put us together wrong, and this is kind of their excuse for getting away with that. Oh man, I think there's a lot in Magician Apprentice that, as someone who hasn't read the rest yet, it's like it's very good setup for what I know is coming down the line.
Yeah.
I mean, you obviously wouldn't have been able to read Magician Apprentice and be like, well, that wraps that up. We could just we're good here. That's that. So just the fact that so much of the world building part of everything and the character building, the early character building, had so many great moments like that, leads me to think that the payoffs are going to be tremendous.
They're pretty good. I mean, like, I don't want to oversell it, but like, there's a reason for most of the things you picked up on in the book. There are reasons for them that become clear or clearer in Magician Master.
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of dropped a hint when we first started. You said something about a Tower of Trials. So I may get some of my Magician apprenticing after all.
It's still pretty light on the... It's interesting. There's still not a whole lot of like the cooking of an apprentice into a real magician, but like there is a little bit of detail here and there. I mean, most of it is like... It's handled in such a way where, like, oh, I was just doing this thing, and I think I was learning, but I couldn't tell. It's pretty neat, the way that the stuff that happens in the next book with Pug in particular, because Pug becomes a really, really interesting layered character with a lot of really weird, like, twinges on his motivation. Some of the things that he says and some of the ways that he talks to people later on in Master are really kind of like, ooh, that's a neat idea. How's Feist going to play around with that? And play around with it he does. In this book and in future books as well.
Well, he definitely gives you a sense that there's something different about Pug from the very beginning. He gives him a mysterious background. Someone found he's an orphan. Someone found him. They raised him in a kingdom, and he ends up with all these lucky moments where he basically becomes a squire just by accident, or by luck, I should say. It's that when he saves the princess.
Yeah, right.
And even then, it's like he had so much luck building up to that. He becomes a wizard's apprentice. The wizard is the one that puts him on the path of hanging out with the princess because they need someone to go riding with her, and he's trustworthy. And through dint of that is how all of that comes about. And that kind of obligates Pug to do a lot of the things that he does later on in that book.
Yeah.
So he's he becomes heavily involved in this war where, had none of that happened, he would have just been another civilian, basically.
Right.
And it's kind of a lost art. People have forgotten the whole... Maybe not forgotten, but there's a lot of people who've tried to ditch the trope of, this random person with an unknown background, who some mysterious stranger we don't know the origins of.
Well, like,
becomes a hero.
Pug has mysterious origins, but they're not like rare origins. Like, there are lots of orphans. There are lots of foundlings. It's just that he happens to be one of them, right?
Well, it's the combination of that and the hidden magical potential that the wizards find.
Well, the hidden magical potential isn't part of his background. He doesn't know about that until later on. So It's one of those things where it's cool because early on it's a chance meeting with a magician, and the magician is like, "Oh, you did this thing really easily that you should have probably had more trouble with," and he's like, "Did I? Okay," and then they leave it at that, and then some interesting stuff happens, and the way that the magic systems work in these books is it's not super like they don't explain everything to you, and there's not a lot of magic. Especially not a lot of magic coming from like the main characters, and so like it doesn't break the plot in any significant way that I can think of. But like
and it also means when there is magic, it counts.
Yeah, when there is magic, it counts. And it's a fun story. I've read Apprentice, half a dozen times, maybe more than that. I've read Master probably an equal number of times because every time I read Apprentice, I'm like, oh, I gotta go read Master.
It's one book, I'm telling you.
Yeah, like one of my favorite books by Feist is A Darkness at Sethanon, which just like all of the cool stuff happens. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but I do really like that book.
I'll have to let you know. Maybe we'll talk about that one once I've read that. But
sure.
I don't think we'll have
I'm
to
always
talk
down
about
to talk about some Feist.
I don't know if we'll have to talk about Magician Master, because save something for anyone who listens to this and wants to go read it. But we could definitely talk about some of the other books after I read them. Yeah,
I mean, whatever seems to work for you, and I'm down to talk some Feist if you read a book and want to talk about the ups and downs. There was a point that you made, something about like a push-pull thing.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking about the Brandon Sanderson stuff that we were talking about when I...
Oh, okay, that.
When I was reading this book, and I was just like, no, this is... It's not a hard magic system. It's a soft magic system, like you said. But
it's softish. It has a decent number of rules, but it has like... You never... They never tell you the rules, basically.
Yeah, they don't try to bolt it down like Brandon Sanderson does.
Right.
But that also means that they don't have to remind you of the rules constantly, which is where a lot of that push-pull thing comes from. That was...
Yes.
And again, I like to be fair to Brandon Sanderson on this, because I don't think Mistborn was that bad of a book.
Right.
There were so many times where I felt like he just needed to... He felt he needed to remind me of all the pushing and pulling that this character is doing with magic, and I gotta be honest, right. I got it the first time. You could kind of segue around that.
And maybe even the third time I would tolerate it, but after that it got a little bit repetitive.
Yeah, it's... How many times does the word push appear in this book? 785.
That's probably a low estimate for that first book.
It might be. I mean, there's probably 100 of them just for people opening doors.
Well, like, even if you just use push in the sense of the magic ability in those books, like, I suspect it was probably on order of 1,000 times that word was used. Just push. And pull probably an almost equal number of times.
Yeah, we could probably figure out if something moved on its own, that there's an implication that someone was pushing or pulling. Well, that's all I'm saying.
The thing is that we understand the technical... Because what he did basically is he turned push and pull into jargon, right? It's like the way that I would use the word laser, right? Like, a push... When he uses push, capital P push, he means that someone used a particular metal to push another metal away from his body in a straight line... maintain, as that system allows, right? But like, once you've established push and pull as jargon, now you can start using other words that interact with the non-jargon versions of push and pull. Like, he could describe that if something was moving parallel to, or something was moving perpendicular to him, and so by pushing it, he basically swung it outward.
Using references to pressure and whatnot.
Right, using references to pressure and stuff, which would have made that book a lot less repetitive to read. But anyway, we've already talked about Sanderson. I'm going to do the
exact same thing, but instead of using push, I'm going to use the word anodized.
Okay.
See how well that goes over.
I'm just going to use the word laser, and it's going to be a very short book. Well, any other thoughts on Magician Apprentice?
I feel like there was another good comedy moment when
there's a few of them. They're peppered in there.
Okay, so I want
so,
a spoiler. I want a spoiler from you. Since you've read them, I need to know up front, because it's so irrelevant that it doesn't matter whether I learn it from reading or not.
Okay.
Raymond Feist spent a lot of time describing the situation where Pug was getting this chimney built for the wizards, for his smoking and his fireplace.
Yes. Yeah.
Is there some payoff for all of that later on in like Magician Master, or was that
you've seen the end of the Chimney Saga?
Okay,
I'm pretty sure. But, I mean, the purpose of the Chimney Saga was to show that Pug had an inventive mind.
That's what I thought at first, but then when they kept going on with it, and it kept like 7 pages later, it's like, oh yeah, we're getting back to this now. We're getting this thing installed now. It's like, oh is this going somewhere? I thought maybe when there had to be a little time delay between designing the chimney and installing the chimney. And that's but it was just enough extra time spent on it that I was like, is there going to be an invasion of this tower at some point, and this chimney is going to be central to them, like killing a bunch of the Serrani on the lower floor? I think at some point,
Pug does return to the castle, and he recognizes the chimney or something like that. Like there's a little callback, I think, later on.
He sort of pats the chimney and says, "Good boy."
What's that? What's from the what's the phrase from that movie Babe?
What was it? Something pig.
That'll do.
That'll do, pig.
Yeah, that'll do, pig.
That'll do, chimney.
Something like that. No, I don't think there's anything more to it other than that they wanted to show that Pug had a inquisitive, curious, and inventive mind, which is important for him later on.
It really did come off to me as something like, this is going to be important later, and I feel like this is a stupid thing to be important later.
It's a magic chimney. No, there's one thing I did want to mention before we close out, but Feist has a really cool little touch of character for his elves. His elvish humor is like one of those things where you like kind of don't get it the first time you see it, but then once you've seen it the 5th time, you're like, oh, I get it. So that's another thing to look forward to if you to any people who are listening who happen to read this book. Elvish humor is good.
Curse those elves.
The dwarves are fun too.
Oh yeah. That he did a great job with, especially for like 1982 when elves were pretty established in fantasy by that time. He made them kind of fun, both the elves and the dwarves.
He does a lot with them later on too. Like there's like what we know of the elves is only like a little tiny fraction of it, and he does a lot of really neat world building with them later on. In Magician Master and in the Krondor saga and later on as well. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on with the elves in his universe.
You know, there was another funny moment that happened in the story. Yeah. Funny, like I saw it as funny, not it was written in the book as funny. But it was back to that scene where Thomas and Pug and Roland were all yucking it up and drinking wine and having fun and becoming comrades.
Yes.
I just kept thinking to myself that whole time, are we not going to bring up the fact that Pug almost accidentally choked Roland to death with magic? Are we just going to gloss over? Okay, I guess we're glossing over that.
We're glossing.
So it never even really came up after it happened. He was like, yeah, shoot, I almost killed you. Sorry about that. And then they just moved on.
Let's be fair. To be fair, that part is handled really, really kind of well, because Pug has only managed to cast magic really once. And it was when he was being attacked by a couple of trolls. And then all of a sudden he does it again. And like, first off, he like regains control over himself, which is something which shows that he made progress, because he had no control over himself with the trolls. And then there's this great moment where Pug manages to like dispel the spell on Roland, and it's just like one sentence, but Roland puts his hand on his sword and is about to pull it out, and Pug's like, no, it's okay. There's no need. And that's when the barrier between them breaks, and it's really a beautifully written little scene.
Yeah, but still.
No, it does get mentioned a couple of times later, because the circumstances under which Pug's magic manifests become important to the way that he must develop his skills.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
I just thought that was kind of funny. It was at the back of my mind so much for like the next 100 pages. Just like nobody's going to talk about this.
Well, I think it kind of ended up being like a thing between Roland and Pug, where it was just like, this thing threatened to end you, and then you almost ended me, and we decided that we're kind of even somehow. It's the psychology of it, I think, is interesting.
Almost like a low-level Bink from the Xanth novels.
Uh-huh.
Did you ever read any of those?
I have not.
Oh, well, it's Piers Anthony. His first Xanth novel is
Piers Anthony Attachments?
Yes, Piers Anthony. He's got a character named Bink who in the first novel everyone thinks he doesn't have any magic, and he ends up fighting the most powerful evil wizard in the world, and the evil wizard basically becomes a good wizard because he realizes that Bink is undefeatable because he does have magic, and his magic is that he's incredibly lucky, and magic the universe will reorganize itself to protect him from any danger.
I see.
So there's nothing the evil wizard can do to him. So they basically make Bink the king of the kingdom. And then
you're the new leader, but no, I can't.
It's great how it happens, because it's like they build up this guy as being a completely evil wizard, but he is not without common sense. And so near the end of the story, he's trying to fight Bink, and he stops, and he stops from doing something that would have killed anyone else. And he's like, I probably would have died if I would have tried this. I just figured out what the problem is. It is one of the greatest wizard battles of all time, just because I don't think it's ever really been done like that before.
It sounds incredibly novel, and I'm gonna have to go check.
Piers Anthony is great. That's how all of his books work. He all of the Xanth novels are basically about. It's usually, I think he's used several characters as the main character. Like maybe he repeats it once or twice. But for the most part, he'll bring in a new character for a new book. Everyone in the world of Xanth has one magical ability, and it like defines who they are and how they solve all of their problems. And in one book, it's Bink being lucky about everything, and then when you go back and read it after realizing what his actual magic power is, you're like, oh, I see why all this happened. And then his son is the one in the next book. Or maybe it's the third book, because I think there's a book where all the magic disappears and Bink has to solve that problem. There's a book where it's the main character is a golem that doesn't have any magic ability, but is really good at solving puzzles or working out ways to solve problems. And so it's just like puzzle after puzzle that you're watching this character solve, and riddles and different ways of solving. I think my favorite one was he was in a cave. And there was a bird or there was a magician that was basically trying to counter everything that he did. So the idea was that the cave would let you create anything you wanted to try to escape. And the antithesis, the being that was in the cave, didn't really understand the world well, but it knew that it could just counter everything you did to make sure you couldn't escape the cave.
Yeah.
So there's a bird in the world of Xanth called an eager, and they summon the eager, and so the cave figures, okay, well, I'll summon the opposite of that to fight the no wait, I've got it backwards. The cave summons the eager, and it's this big bird that's not going to let them escape the cave.
Okay.
And so it's the good guy's turn now, and they tell the creature of the cave, okay, well, we'll summon the female version of that. Give us an egress.
Yeah, okay.
And so the cave magic thing creates an egress for them, and they just walk by it. Like, it creates a big bird that's supposed to be a female eager, and he calls it an egress, and so they just walk by, and they're out of the cave.
Nice.
It's a lot of wordplay. Piers Anthony does a lot of wordplay in his books.
Okay.
And the characters he creates are usually pretty fun. Like, he'll always give them some weird ability that seems like you can't do much with it, and then it turns out it's like the perfect ability to solve all the problems.
Interesting. I'll have to check some of that stuff out.
Yeah, that's a pretty beloved series of books. I went back and listened to them, or not listened. I went back and read a few of them because I hadn't read them in a long time. They kind of read a little more for a younger reader than I remember.
Sure.
Yeah. Or maybe I just picked a bad one to jump in on, but they're still fun.
Okay. I'm all right with that. Yeah, sure. All right. I guess that's an episode.
Maybe.
A little Feist with a topping of Anthony.
Yeah, we can, you can call this something like a let's get feisty with magic, or I don't know.
Something like that.
Brainstorm some titles here. I'll leave that in your hands.
Okay, I'll do my best. Well, this has been the Wordy Pair Podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. As always, I'm Rudy.
And I'm Justin LaFleur Attachments.
And we'll be back next week. See y'all later.
Thanks for listening to the Wordy Pair Podcast. Our passion is all things writing, world building, and getting into the weird and wonderful world of fiction. We hope you enjoyed our unique takes. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to get your weekly dose of writing weirdness. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hit us up on Twitter. For Rudy, it's @Rudolph_Cone. And for Justin, @Ninja Mouse Chew. See you next time on the Wordy Pair Podcast.